This is the DRS train.
The Driver of the Day vote has been a key part of fan engagement since 2016, but based on how many times Lando has won it, it's really more of a glorified popularity contest. I'm Peter Brook, I'm joined by Nedzo's F1 Gridbox and Acescheil, and you're listening to the DRS Train podcast. So, Driver of the Day. So, as I mentioned, yes, this was introduced in 2016 and gets awards at the end of each race, and people can vote on who they think drove the best or who maybe they just like the best. We thought we'd have some fun and try and start looking at seasons from before that and apply it retroactively. And so for this first episode, we've chosen 2012. And so I don't know about you two, but for me, 2012 is one of my favorite seasons. It's a real modern classic and one that I remember very fondly.
Yeah. It was my first season watching F1. The first race I remember watching was Spa, but the first race I actually vividly remember watching was Brazil. It was just a zenith of. It was a mix of lots of teams being competitive at lots of different points, whether it be Ferrari, McLaren, Red Bull, Williams, Sauber. They all had chances to get wins. You could easily have seen like a 9 or 10 winner season, which is crazy in modern F1 terms, considering what we've seen over the last couple of years of Hamilton and Verstappen dominance. But yeah, it was one of the best seasons in modern F1 history since at least the 2000s, no doubt.
Heartbreak aside, I also very much like it.
Yeah, so what we're going to do today is basically, the basic format is that we'll just go race by race systematically. We'll talk a bit about the races and who the real standout drivers, and then we'll try to give a verdict on who we personally would have voted driver of the day for, or realistically who we think would have won it when you factor in what the fan base was like at the time and how the drivers were received. So yeah, let's get going. Let's start with Australia. This was a race which I don't remember much of it myself in terms of action. The main thing that I remember personally is the fact that HRT failed to qualify for it. So there were 22 cars there instead of 24. But yeah, it was a front row lockout for McLaren, and then it was actually won by Button with Hamilton third, and then Vettel came through to second. So it showed at the beginning of the season it wasn't exactly going to be a cakewalk for Red Bull.
Who wants to go first? Nedzo?
I'll go. Right. I personally, there are a couple of kind of standouts. Obviously, Button won against Hamilton, which is obviously quite a good achievement. But you said that Peter, you remember HRT. I also remember the other bit of action was Maldonado crashing on the final lap. And I think this is going to become a theme of 2012 for me, because I am a Maldonado sympathizer. I think he's a lot more underrated than people think he was. I wouldn't say he's driver of the day material for Australia, because although he did get up into sixth in what was not a sixth place car, he did crash. So that kind of does eliminate that. Button is a very good shout. Vettel was just kind of there, so I suppose maybe not. I can't really, apart from Daniel Ricciardo, I can't really think of any specifically amazing performances up and down the field, personally.
Yeah, so in my case, I'm using the magazines from the time, and this magazine ranked the driver with a mark from 1 to 10 for every race. And in the case of Australia, there's no standout performance. The 10 goes to Jenson Button. The comment is first row, victory, and fastest lap in a race in which it counts. Fighting against the vibrations of a set of tires and the safety car, which cuts his advantage. A step for the championship. As for Daniel Ricciardo, I also think it was a standout performance, and I also think that performance aside, he would get the driver of the day as a popularity, because Australian driver, first race in a proper car, because he only did half a year on the HRT, so first race on a proper car, already points at his home race. I think he would get the driver of the day based on popularity. Maybe on performance, Jenson Button really was the best that day.
Yeah, I mean, Ricciardo is actually a good shout because he qualified 10th for this race, so he made Q3 in a Toro Rosso, which at the time was quite a rare achievement. But then he actually dropped to last at the start. I think he was one of the ones that got spun round or hit somebody at the first corner. So he actually dropped to the back, but then even with that, he climbed through and managed to finish in the points. Helped, of course, by Maldonado crashing, but he actually gained 3 positions on the final lap. So he saved his tyres well. The obvious answer is Button, but to be honest, Ricciardo was a good shout. And when you factor in it's his home race, the local crowd, he very easily could have won it, I think.
Oh, sorry, go on, Nedzo.
Okay, I was going to say, speaking of home crowds, where would Webber filter in all this? Because obviously he was in the other Red Bull. I don't really remember anything from him in this race.
He started 9th or whatever it was and finished 4th. He didn't really do much. I mean, he finished 4th in like the first 3 races or something. He started 5th, dropped to 9th because of course he did at the start, and then finished 4th. He was never particularly good at his home race.
He got a bit lucky with the safety car, although given the advantage that McLaren and Red Bull had, and the fact that below them it was an entire mess. I don't know if you remember the last laps. There was Ricciardo, Perez, Rosberg, Vergne, and Di Resta all fighting from 7th place down. It was a mess. I think Perez crashed with Rosberg. And anyway, what I was gonna say is... yes, that Webber was lucky because the safety car helped him, and 4th place is honestly the least possible with that car, so not really impressive. He never was in Australia, except for his first ever race, in which he got points with the Minardi.
Yeah, he was one of the ones that just never really benefited. In the same way that Ricciardo, I mean, we're saying that when he's probably winning driver of the day for this week. He doesn't have the best record for his home races either, although a lot of it is more bad luck rather than bad performances. But yeah, I mean, Webber, the fourth, I mean, to be fair, the top 4 finished within 5 seconds of one another, which even today is quite rare. So it was clearly close at the front. But yeah, for me, the only real candidates would be either Button or Ricciardo, and I'm leaning towards Ricciardo.
Popularity won.
I agree with Ricciardo. I mean, Button I think would be a good shout, but again, with the home crowd, I think that would be the realistic, like what would probably happen, even if that's not maybe the most deserving candidate.
Okay, so if we move on to the next race, which is Malaysia, the home crowd theoretically would have been cheering on Caterham here, but I don't think they would have been contenders for either of their drivers for driver of the day. Yeah, this was a very interesting race. To have only the second race in, we get this huge downpour at the start. Early safety car, Carter Kayan gets up to 6th place because he starts the race on the right tyres and then ruins it later on by giving Vettel a puncture, which almost cost him the championship. And then we see astonishing performances from both Alonso and Perez, with Checo chasing him down at the end, seemingly on course for his first win, and definitely doesn't deliberately run wide to stop a customer Ferrari beating an actual Ferrari.
I'll go first. So, in my case, the comments are exactly as you said. The 10 was given to Fernando Alonso and Sergio Perez. For Fernando Alonso, the comment is, it should have been an 11. In this, which is no longer a supercar championship, he's showing to be the only Superman. But this time, the mark is shared with the perfect management from the pit. Perfect. Sergio Perez instead is, it is common among the great drivers of taking the first chance. And he does. Of course, he makes a mistake, and he probably lost the win due to that. But better drivers than him have done worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that it was done in a Sauber should really kind of outweigh that, because we discussed this in a recent episode. We were talking about how good that 2012 Ferrari actually was. At the beginning of the season, it wasn't brilliant, so it wasn't a particularly competitive car that Alonso was running either. But the Sauber was less competitive, and also this was only his second year in the sport still. It's kind of weird that, to be honest, to think that how close he came to winning this, and then it would take 8.5 years before he would actually win his first race. Yeah, those two are the ones that stand out for being notably good performances. I know it's not what we're discussing, but the one person that was horrendously bad would be Jenson Button in that one, because he had a collision with Carter Kayan early on, and then that was his fault. and then he got stuck behind Caterhams for a while and just ends up miles outside the point. So huge kind of contrasts in a race like this of performance.
He had a couple of those in 2012. Obviously, we'll get to those later. But yeah, Button had a bit of a bad moment. I mean, personally, I think because I obviously I didn't watch the race live, but I watched it back when I first got into F1, and it was Perez was catching up from what I remember quite insanely quickly. Sometimes it was like a second a lap on Alonso, from what I remember. And then obviously, as you said, he went wide. Whether or not it was a case of they didn't want a Ferrari customer to beat the Ferrari works team, which is easily possible because only one time has that ever happened in F1 history, and that was Vettel in Monza 2008. I do think that Perez. I mean, I'd personally put Perez's performance above Alonso, even with the mistake, because I think he outperformed the car more than Fernando did. I'm not sure where you put that Ferrari in that previous episode, in terms of whether it was third, fourth, or fifth quickest. I'd say is equally fair. But yeah, the Sauber was at best sixth quickest, so it just depends.
Yeah, I think the Ferrari was sort of kind of upper midfield at this point, rather than a firm front runner. Another standout performance actually, because we're talking about Toro Rosso's Jev. He went from 18th to 8th in that race, and I remember the team were like praising him and being like, "Oh, congrats on your first points," and he was like, "Well, I don't really finishing 8th. It doesn't do much for me, even in a Toro Rosso." He was like, "Surely winning the race would be considered good."
Covering all that you said, I think the Ferrari was worse than Sauber. Absolutely true in the first 3 races of the year, which basically Australia, Malaysia, and China, because that Ferrari had abysmal top speed, and the Sauber instead didn't. The Sauber was great in top speed. So the Sauber was basically a Ferrari without all the issue it had at the start of the year. So in my opinion, Perez had the faster car. We all saw it once the track was trying out. The Sauber was faster, and he made a mistake and he didn't win. So the driver of the vote really is either Alonso because he drove an excellent performance, or it goes to Perez because popularity from a driver on a up-and-coming team, which is always in the lower midfield when it's fighting for the win. So it's either Perez or Alonso, driver of the day. As a shout-out to under... Uh, underappreciated performance, Bruno Senna. He finished 6th on the Williams on a very chaotic day.
Yeah, there's some good points there. I mean, Senna's F1 career was a bit of a letdown, I can't lie. Obviously, came into F1 in 2010 with HRT. You can't do anything in a HRT that's of any note. He replaced Heidfeld for a bit at Lotus, just was kind of, or Renault, sorry, was kind of running the midfield, and then with Williams, he had this was one of his good performances, but most of the time was mired in the midfield. Yeah, I mean, I given what you said, well, if it is actually true that Ferrari was slower than the Sauber, I mean, I'm not sure because obviously I wasn't there for the Ferrari episode. Then maybe Alonso was better. Also, to give a point on Peter's Verne point, how he managed to move up. I'm pretty sure I remember that he actually stayed on Inters before the red flag. He actually braved it out on Inters, and then it got red flagged. So he got a free pit stop under the red flag, and that's how he was able to keep that position. I think he restarted in 7th.
Yeah, I think that was what did it with him, because he was the opposite in that the HRTs both started on wet tires. Everyone else had to switch from inters to wets, but he decided not to and got away with it because the race got red flagged so quickly. Yeah, I mean, I'm leaning towards Perez. I mean, I remember watching this race live, and at the time, I really didn't like Alonso, and I was just getting annoyed, especially after Perez ran wide, and I knew he wasn't going to win, because it's like, Alonso doesn't need any more wins. He's got, 20 odd of them or something. Like, he doesn't need them. Checo does need them. So I think, yeah, for me, I'm giving it to Checo.
I'll give it to Checo as well. I was thinking Alonso, but then, you know what? I think Checo was the underdog. He had everything to lose, and I mean, he did lose it, but not as badly as he could have done.
I also think that I think Alonso did a way better performance than Perez, but Perez will win driver of the day just based on popularity and the fact he was the underdog in the eye of the public. So he definitely would have won driver of the day, given this, given your points. Yes, absolutely.
So next up is China. This was a very interesting race because Mercedes suddenly turned up for the first time on their revival or their return to Formula One. They'd introduced this kind of double DRS system that they had, which people have tried to explain to me how it works, and I still don't entirely understand it. There were these little tubes on the side of the wings, and when they opened the DRS, it was something like it sent the air forwards over the car and then back again through the rear wing, which stalled it and meant that it had immense straight line speed on that very long back straight. Something like, I don't entirely understand it, but it worked very effectively because it meant they locked out the front row.
It is, you pretty much explain it. Basically, there are ducts on the side of the rear wing. The dividers, the lateral dividers of the rear wing are empty inside so that the duct can continue. It goes, this duct continues towards the big wing, then it goes into the chassis all the way past the driver into the nose. Then in the nose it continues down the front wing, and then in the front wing the duct continues and it finally exits under the flaps of the front wing. And so it blows under the front wing also the air. It's basically a long tube from the rear wing to the front wing.
But it's blowing the air forwards.
Yes.
How? That needs
power.
That's what I don't understand is how it blows the air forwards on a car traveling that fast when the air is going in the opposite direction. Because it sounds like the F ducts, but in reverse. To be honest,
he's finding a diagram for you now, so you can.
Yeah, I'm trying to work out like how.
Yeah,
you could...
I'll show you through the webcam. It's gonna be very clear to see.
The sheer power of downforce manages to reverse the air, because if it was being thrusted forwards by some kind of fan or whatever, it's like fair enough. But I don't see how.
It probably also takes power away from the engine as well.
Or if it creates a vacuum, that means that the air moves forward because it's filling the void. Otherwise, I don't understand how it can do that.
Okay, so I think you already have an idea of the shape of the duct on the rear wing. And then Michael Schumacher crashed in Malaysia, so a crane came to pick up the car up in the air, and so from below, people were for the first time able to see where the duct exits, and it's basically, I don't know how much you can see. This is the nose, and there are these yellow arrows. These are the two ducts. And then on the front wing here, right on this line I'm tracing with the finger, this is the opening, and air blows under in this direction. So it basically does this movement on the front wing, down, under the flap.
So this for audience, because they can't see
Yes.
Ace. Yeah. Okay, I think I just about understand, but I'm picturing literally a tube that runs uninterrupted from the front of the car all the way to the back. But it sounds like
Of course, it can't be of a cylindrical shape, because it can be cylindrical inside the rear wing, and then it has to change shape all over the place. But it's basically a duct of
so
different
basically
shapes.
so basically they turned their car into a colander and it's made it faster. It sounds like that's the closest I can get to that. So either way, it worked very well at that circuit because that giant back straight. Mercedes lock out the front row. Rosberg wins it, his first win, and they presumably would have won the race, would have got a 1-2 if Schumacher's wheel hadn't come off. But yeah, the obvious standout performance is Rosberg. Kobayashi had a pretty miserable race because he started third, but then he dropped to 10th. Raikkonen famously lost 10 places in one lap when his tyres went off a cliff. Otherwise, the rest of the performances I mean, Williams actually went from 13th and 14th to 7th and 8th, so they had a good race. But otherwise, yeah, the main standout really is Mercedes.
I think the two drivers who were the best in performance are Rosberg and Button, because we shouldn't forget Button was the only driver who ever was close to Rosberg and able to fight him. Just Michael Schumacher, people say that without the retirement he would have won because he was better than Rosberg. Maybe true, we can't know, and he qualified behind, so ultimately I think there is no good argument to say Schumacher was better than Rosberg, so it's either Rosberg or Button. Button at the end couldn't fight because the last pit stop, the McLaren took too long, and so he came out in traffic. It should have been second, clear of third place Raikkonen, and instead it was behind Raikkonen and Vettel when he came out. And so, yeah, the driver of the day is between Rosberg and Button, and I think it's clear that from popularity it goes to Rosberg because first Mercedes win since the 1950s, first win of Rosberg, dominating performance. Come on, I think Rosberg is the clear driver of the day.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. So then, moving on, Bahrain. By comparison to the races before, a relatively processional one. This is when Bahrain was still held in the daytime, and it wasn't really that good at producing good races. And then we switched to a night race, and it's given us several bangers. Yeah, so lights to flag victory for Vettel, being challenged by both Lotuses, so they had a good time. Pretty miserable race for Hamilton. This is when the cracks started to form in his relationship with McLaren. But yeah, otherwise just a fairly ordinary race. I mean, I'm leaning. You could say Vettel just because he dominated, but then you could also say Lotus because they looked at certain points in contention to win it.
I mean, because I remember watching like a rerun of the 2012 season. I think it was a season review of some sort, and apparently Raikkonen had several chances to overtake Vettel and just didn't. Apparently they had like several chances to go up the inside or the outside, and he just didn't. He just stayed behind him.
So in my magazine, the Vettel takes the 10, a full 10 maximum marks. The comment is the style of the world champion is back. An incredible start that after the first lap puts him at 2.2 seconds over second place. He easily handles the comeback from Raikkonen, despite the Lotus being faster in the straights, being a problem. I pretty much agree because Vettel was absolutely dominating, and Raikkonen did make a mistake when he tried to pass to overtake Vettel. He pushed the tires too much, and so it should be between Vettel and Raikkonen, but Vettel won deservedly, and I don't think there is any other driver down the grid who did anything impressive enough to steal his driver of the day.
Yeah, I mean, the rest of the race was fairly ordinary. I mean, Raikkonen, the one thing he has going for them is that he started from 11th to go for second, but then he just didn't really seize the moment, I suppose. And I think I can get away with saying this because Ciaron isn't here, probably. It's so, yeah, I think on that basis, it sounds like it's a driver of the day vote for Vettel.
So is that 3 different drivers in the first 3 races?
4.
Or
Four different
count.
yeah, in the 4. So we'll keep this trend up.
I should keep track. So Australia was Ricciardo.
Ricardo, I've been writing them down as well.
Then Perez, then Rosberg, and then
now Vettel. Yeah.
And now we're going on to Spain, which is where we're going to get another one, I think.
Yeah, I wonder who's going to get this one. I mean, if we're realistic, I think Maldonado would have probably got at least 90% of the vote for driver of the day. Like, it's just such an obvious choice. Admittedly, had Lewis not been disqualified from qualifying, maybe he could have challenged him for the win as well. I don't know, but beyond that, yeah, he gets challenged by Alonso. Alonso is not helped by being stuck behind Charles Pic for a whole lap. Raikkonen, his strategy, he tries a different strategy which doesn't quite work out. Schumacher crashes into Bruno Senna, which is, we'll see later, has consequences. Vettel has a pretty miserable race. Kirby actually goes well. He goes from 9th to 5th. Yeah, but Maldonado is the obvious choice.
I disagree with what you said. It's not 90%. It's at least 65, because I bet there is at least 1/3 of the world population who would have seen Hamilton going from last to 7th and just driver of the day, and they stole him the pole because they didn't want him to win. So just by popularity, it takes 1/3 of the votes. Then, of course, Maldonado, driver of the day. First win for Williams since 2004. First win for him. I think driver of the day for Maldonado, but definitely a strong opposition by all the Hamilton fans.
Yeah, I've got a couple of points. Firstly, if Hamilton did start on pole and Maldonado started second, considering their track record of on track, let's say when they're on track together and battling for position, I think it might have been a bit entertaining to see what would have happened, considering we're going to go through, there's some things that happened later on in the year, and in Monaco 2011 they came together and it was Lewis's fault. So though it would be interesting to see what happened. And also to I think it was Peter's point about Alonso getting stuck behind Charles Pic for an entire lap. Maldonado had a slow pit stop. I think he lost like 2 seconds in one of his pit stops because one of his wheels didn't go on, he got dropped late or something like that. So I think in terms of, yeah, they both got unlucky, but they both got equally unlucky with things that are outside of their control. So I do think Maldonado definitely takes the crown here.
The fact that Maldonado had such strong undercuts, that's what feeds into this notion that he was given like special birthday tires that made that car so competitive suddenly.
The Frank Williams birthday stuff.
Yeah, because because I mean, Alex Wirtz, who was an advisor for the team, he's like, oh, well, actually, what we've done is that we designed these new brake ducts, which help to warm up the wheel rims. But then suddenly at Monaco, everyone else had exactly the same brake ducts as us. And so that's why we went back to being just as competitive as we were before. It's like, yeah, I'm sure that is. And that definitely explains why your garage spontaneously caught fire and burned all the tyres right after the race as well.
So the thing about the undercut, I think it's not that Williams had an amazing undercut. I think it was still Ferrari having problems, because from the Ferrari episode, who watched it, still remembers that the first fix came after the Mugello test in Spain. And so the Ferrari was much better in Spain. It was competitive enough not to necessarily beat Red Bull and McLaren, but competitive enough to beat everyone else. Close, by all means. It's not a foregone conclusion, but it now has the upper end. But the inherent problems are still the same. It still lacks a bit of top speed. It still lacks a bit of traction. In fact, you see, out of the last turn, Alonso never has enough traction to stay close to Maldonado down the straight. And so he never is able to overtake. It's because the car still lacks traction, and the cars also lack aero-balanced. And the point with aero-balance is that a car which lacks aero-balance is very inconsistent with the lap times. Usually, as the race goes on and as the fuel burns out, the lap times get quicker. For an aero-unbalanced car, that doesn't happen as much. So if in Australia, I remember the Ferrari was lapping in 1:27 at the start of the race, towards the end of the race it was high 1:26. So it didn't really improve much lap time, despite having much less fuel. And this problem is much less severe in Spain, but is still present. So when Alonso does his lap times in the in-lap time and the out-lap times, they're never impressive because the car is still aero-balanced. The Williams isn't. The Williams works as it should, especially in Spain when they did a perfect work to set up the car. And so you see that the Ferrari simply isn't able to do undercuts. I think that's the reason, not that they have special tires or other stuff.
I think Williams did have a very stable rear end, because I remember watching that pole lap a few years ago, and Maldonado had, because you were allowed to back then, he had his DRS open through the final corner. So he had to have his. So he had the car that was stable enough to literally he held the steering wheel straight and just put the DRS on, and he just turned around the corner and it was fine.
In 2012, the DRS could be opened whenever you want in qualifying. Okay.
Yeah,
Because no, go on.
It was 2013 when they took it out.
Okay. And obviously, if you could get away with using it in corners, you would. One thing that's puzzling a bit to me is the fact that I don't know if it's a skill issue or maybe they only gave these special birthday tyres to Maldonado because Senna started 12th and he wasn't really in contention even before he got taken out by Michael. Wasn't really in contention for points, so it seemed to be just Maldonado. In the same way that Ferrari, Massa started 16th and finished 15th, while Alonso was second.
So I was gonna say because you make a great comment about Maldonado being flat out with the DRS open in a turn. That is, it's really hard because the DRS opens and you have much less rear downforce, so you really risk to oversteer and crash, like it happened to. Was it Ericsson at Silverstone 2018 when I tried to take the first DRS on all the way to turn 3 through turn 1 and 2, and so Ericsson crashed and they stopped it. They changed the DRS on, and I wanted to add that this makes the double DRS on the Mercedes extremely powerful because since it stalls both rear wing and front wing, you don't have the problem of oversteer when you have DRS active. You just have much less downforce, but you don't. The balance remains the same. You don't have suddenly a lot of oversteer to control. So it really is a strong tool, the double DRS.
But yeah, I think we can all agree that it's quite an easy win for Maldonado. I mean, when you said if you think 35 would go to Lewis, I assumed you were going to say Alonso because again, it's his home race, and I remember again watching this live. It was a similar thing to Malaysia. Is no, Alonso doesn't need any more wins. Give it to Maldonado, and he got it. So I think, of course, had Hamilton been at the front, we could have had a certified 2016 moment and then given Alonso a home win for all we know. So yeah, we'll give that one to Maldonado. Next is Monaco. This one of the better Monacos of recent years because the front runners were so close together at the end, even though they couldn't overtake. For everyone, the main standout is Schumacher getting his pole that wasn't to be. Even if he had got pole, the car broke down, so he still wouldn't have won the race. But I guess all I could say, Webber finally showed up. He got pole, held it, and won. The Force India's made moves, but otherwise everyone else was kind of stuck where they started.
Can I just make a point on Schumacher? I did a video on Schumacher's return to F1 for his Mercedes return, and I actually worked out, obviously, including stuff like, for example, China, he had his wheel failure. I think I concluded that if Schumacher had have not had any mechanical faults or problems throughout the first 6 races of 2012, and he would have won Monaco, he would have led the championship and would have been on 90 points, which is like 12 points ahead of Vettel, who would have been second.
Ooh. So, yes, for Monaco, I think driver of the day is also easy because nothing much happened. Just gonna comment, the magazine gives Mark Webber a 10 and says he inherits the pole from Schumacher, but he makes use of it like a champion. He starts extremely well. He opens up just enough to control the race, and then he won. He's back. The Red Bull not yet. Who deserves who? It's all. I don't think I translated it well. Sorry.
Yeah, I think I should point out the real stinker. Well, apart from Maldonado celebrating his win by crashing at the first corner, but also Button, because he spent most of the race stuck behind a Caterham, and then when he tried to pass him, he crashed into him. So this was another one of those races where Button could go from being just unbeatable to then just not, like he's not even trying, which just happened too many times in 2012.
Yeah, he had that a few times. I mean, Webber was pretty. Going back to Webber, he was pretty good around Monaco, from what I remember, because he won in 2010 as well, didn't he? And he was just like obviously, Monaco was one of his. This race was one of his last wins in F1. He was just very good. He was very calm, concise. He's like an olden day Oscar Piastri. I wonder where Oscar got that from. But yeah. For a Monaco race, it wasn't as dull as you'd expect. And yeah, I think Webber, it's easy to say Webber did well. Rosberg did well because he finished in the podium positions. Even though it was a train of cars, it wasn't able to get past. But
I mean, he started second and finished second. So
yeah, in a Mercedes, that's pretty impressive because double DRS wouldn't have had any effect around Monaco, really. I don't think, because you weren't allowed to use it in the tunnel, were you, DRS?
No.
I actually think Rosberg did less than possible because if Schumacher got pole position and without the penalty he would have been first and he would have won the race, that means the Mercedes was good enough to win the race and Rosberg didn't win the race. So
that's a good point.
Even a better point to say that Mark Webber was driver of the day because the Red Bull was then the best car.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think of that.
I mean, yeah. Because they kind of stuck where they were. I mean, Vettel, he went from 9th to 4th, which is not bad. I mean, he was helped by retirements for Schumacher, Grosjean right at the start as well. Otherwise, yeah, it was quite a procession. I mean, I'll give a mini shout out to Carter Cahan. I think his best lap was within 1.5 seconds of either the fastest lap or within a second of Button's fastest lap or something. For an HRT, that's not bad. Best results of the season.
The leaders were cruising towards the end, weren't they? Because I know wasn't this the race where it kind of got greasy towards the end, but no one wanted to pit because they wanted to keep track position and they didn't want to switch to the Inters.
Maybe I don't. All I remember is just seeing 5 cars running in a train together and thinking anywhere other than Monaco this would be electrifying, but you just know they can't pass each other, so nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
About Narain Kartikeyan, I'm just gonna read also his comment on the magazine. So, satisfactions must be found, and among the drivers with 0 points, Narain is in front of both Petrov and De La Rosa. Finishing 15th, 2 laps down, and with 2 pit stops, is the maximum of satisfaction for him. So, yes, it basically agrees that Narain actually drove an impressive race, given the HRT limits, obviously.
He made it almost halfway through the race before getting lapped as well, which is actually really good at such a short circuit as well. Normally you get lapped much sooner than that.
Wasn't 15th? Oh,
no, go on.
Wasn't 15th place also last on the road though? Wasn't he the last guy who finished?
He was, yeah. It did mean though that he beat De La Rosa in the driver's standings at the end of the year with that 15th place, and I think it did temporarily put him ahead of
the Caterans.
Some of the Mauritius and that, but yeah, something of that nature.
The thing you commented about Peter is that you said he went until half of the race before getting lapped. I noticed that when teams are really cautious about tire degradation, that usually happens, that the field is much closer together. We saw it last race in Belgium. So we got the field extremely close until lap 4, everyone had DRS. And then even until lap 8, if Hamilton had pitted from first place, he would have been last. And so the field was extremely close, more than usual. And only when the team were sure about tire management, that the tires could get to the end, they finally start to push and the field opens up. And 2012 Monaco was pretty much the same, because everybody was thinking that the tire degradation would be a real issue in the race, and then it was much less severe than it was seen. So people went slow in the first laps, and then when they were sure about tire degradation, that they could get to the end, they started to push. And so they opened up, and that means the HRT took half a race before getting lapped the first time. And so just I thought it was a nice comparison, so I mentioned it.
I mean, tyre wear at Monaco in general is quite low because it's low speed corners, and we saw in the race this year that George did 75 laps on medium tyres or something. So it's the kind of thing where you can do that if you want to. I mean, Spa is. I mean, the characteristics of it are the complete opposite of Monaco, but we saw both this year and last year that nobody got lapped with no safety cars, partly because it's the longest circuit on the calendar, but also because the field spread now is so much closer than it was in 2012 that they just don't spread out as much.
So you make a good point, but I have a counterpoint. In 2012, the Pirellis are crap.
Yes.
So...
Yeah, they're useless. It's taken 13 years, but the tyres kind of work now, even though we still have people like Leclerc who are obsessed with going as slow as possible whenever leading and just making tyres last as long as they can. But yeah, in 2012, they really were rotten. It was like 3-4 stop strategies most races. So yeah, let's give that to Webber. So that's our 6th driver of the day in 6 races. Can we keep this going? Canada next. So Canada, Hamilton won this 7th win in 7 races, quite a convincing one from him. Checo had one of his tyre whisperer moments. He went from 15th to 3rd. Grosjean was a contender for a win. Vettel and Alonso were having degradation problems. HRT had their mini conspiratorial double retirement where until then they were going well, and so everyone's saying, well, actually, maybe they knew the cars were not going to finish the race. They just filled them with half a tank of fuel to make them look faster. Yeah, I think this one is the main standout is the top 3, Hamilton, Grosjean, Checo.
Yeah.
So the magazine gives a full mark only to Hamilton. It says magical. Regardless of the superiority of the McLaren, he makes use of the tire best. He understands that they're the key to the race, and he's aggressive when he's needed and cautious when needed. Instead, Grosjean and Perez, which are 2nd and 3rd in the opposite order, I think Perez is 2nd and Grosjean 3rd, both get a 9 mark. And I also think they were not as good as Hamilton because Hamilton was trying to keep back Vettel and Alonso. So, tough task.
I mean, yeah, Vettel and Alonso, their tyres went out the window at the end because Alonso was leading for a while and then he dropped a lot of positions. Vettel as well, where Vettel made it work better. I mean, Grosjean and Checo did have to come back from further than Hamilton because Hamilton started 2nd. But Checo came all the way from the midfield to do 3rd, so it's kind of... I think it still leans towards Hamilton, but it would have been between him and Checo realistically for driver of the day, but probably Hamilton. And again, another absolute stinker from Button. This one, if I remember.
He got a 16th as well. He was like 16th and he was behind Petrov, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was just, again, he was like, it wasn't even like he got caught out by a safety car or whatever. He just didn't... He started badly and just didn't... He started in the points and just fell backwards.
Yeah.
And couldn't make the car work.
Yeah, I think Hamilton takes this one.
Yeah.
Button literally started the year with a step for the championship, did one other good race, and then he was nowhere. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I also think Hamilton gets driver of the day. I don't think Grosjean and Perez were enough impressive because you've got to remember the votes come in before the end of the race, and so before 5 laps from the end, Perez and Grosjean are still behind Hamilton, Alonso, and I think also Vettel. Vettel pitted 8 laps before the end.
Mm.
So yeah, till very late into the race, it was Hamilton, Alonso, and Vettel. So I think a good chunk of the votes already come in for Hamilton, who is winning after overtaking Alonso. And yes, there are none left for Perez and Grosjean at the end. So I think Hamilton gets the driver of the day.
So it's 7 from 7 winners, and it's 7 from 7 driver of the days.
Yeah, so far it seems to be. Okay, so after that is Valencia. Again, I think this is a fairly obvious winner of the vote. It's a shame because Valencia people critique because they don't like the circuit because it didn't, except for this one, it didn't produce good races. They didn't like how it looked. Maybe it's a nostalgia because it's so symbolic of that V8, the kind of V8 diffuser era, as I call it, that we had late noughties, early 2010s. Yeah, Alonso wins. Realistically, without it should have been Vettel without the alternator failure. Grosjean was also a contender until his car blew up. Lots of action further back. Hamilton Maldonado moment again. Just a really good race all around. It's just a shame. It's like, oh wow, you finally delivered. So bye bye. We're not racing here again.
Yeah, unpopular opinion. I think Maldonado's in contention for driver of the day, considering where his car was in terms of performance.
I thought you were going to say because he booted Hamilton out of a race in Spain, the Alonso one.
No, I mean, I just see. The thing is, with that incident with Hamilton, I don't even, like. He got a penalty for it, but I don't think it was his fault. He got forced out wide, and he had nowhere to go. The only way he could have avoided that incident with Hamilton is by cutting the corner, going ahead of it, and then giving them the position back, which wouldn't have worked. Like, I think that he was given a harsh penalty. Like, that was just typical arrogant McLaren Lewis Hamilton thinking he could force everyone else off, and they just have to deal with it.
Yeah, I think 12 years on, I'm hoping that people are ready to have that conversation about Hamilton's complicity in that collision. Because, yeah, you can see he doesn't give him any room. If that was Monaco or anywhere that had barriers, Maldonado would have just hit the wall and then probably hit Lewis at the same time. But otherwise, his options were either pull out of it, which was kind of difficult, or just cut the corner.
Yeah. Nowadays, you might be able to consider cutting the corner because some drivers just do that to avoid a collision. But then you'd have to give the position back. And was it the second, or was it the final lap, or was it the second to last?
It's hard. This was the final lap. The thing is, tricky is I can't remember. Race control, they changed the rules in every single race. I can't remember if it was the case at the time where you had to, if you give the position back immediately, then you avoid getting a penalty. But they had different standards in terms of 5-second penalties, and I think this is before. It would say in a really passive-aggressive notion that race control have noted an incident or whatever. Yeah. It's like, yeah, we see what you've done there, and they just leave it at that, and just leave it at that kind of thing. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, Alonso, it's Alonso that's getting driver of the day here.
I'm happy to give Maldonado second.
I mean, you think, yeah. I mean, in terms of the top, if you were going to say a top three, I think that Schumacher would have got a lot of votes as well because he got the only podium of his comeback.
Even though it wasn't really a spectacular drive, he was running fifth, and then Matt Hamilton and Maldonado blew up. So
I mean, he went from 12th to third, but then Alonso went from 11th to third. Webber went from 19th to 4th, which is not bad, but no one cares about Webber.
Better than 2010.
Yeah, better than 2010 at least. The others were just kind of there. I mean, most of the people at the back, we lost 3 front runners in that we lost Kobayashi, Vettel, and Grosjean early on. But otherwise, the standout, it just on vibes alone is Alonso, really.
Absolutely, Alonso wins driver of the day. I mean, starting 11th, winning, being in the lead already halfway through the race. So there's a lot of time to vote for votes to come in and vote him because it wasn't a last lap win. He was first already halfway through the race. So there's plenty of time for Spanish people to join in, watch him, and then vote for him. I think performance-wise, it is Alonso and Vettel. Vettel was just as impressive as Alonso. Michael Schumacher and Raikkonen were also both impressive. But yes, in Spain, from 11th of the grid, first driver to win twice this season, Alonso gets driver of the day. The comments on my magazine are a full mark for both Vettel and Alonso. For Vettel, it says he isn't in the alternator, so he has nothing to reproach himself. He's right to say he had the pace to win, but unfortunately for him, in this championship, a 0 is worth double. And for Alonso, it says maybe it is better an 11, like the starting position from which he builds an incredible race. Okay, the safety car. Okay, the troubles of the others. But who else would be able to keep such a high concentration?
Yeah. It was a good it was a good night because wasn't there the Euros final like the night before the Europe race, and like because I remember Crofty saying last night it was for Xabi Alonso, now it's for Fernando Alonso in the commentary. I think that's what he said.
Probably was. I can remember watching the Euros final in which Spain won. I don't remember where it was within the context of Formula One, but
It was
of course
one
that
because
was
they won it in 08 and they won it in 2012 as well, so it might have been the 08 one.
yeah, probably. I think I remember watching the 2012 one because I know that in Hungary as well that overlapped with the Olympics was going on at that time as well. So that's all the worlds colliding. Okay, so that Alonso. So Alonso is now our 8th driver of the day in 8 races. Eight races. After that is Silverstone. Of course, I went to this race. Very, very wet all weekend. It was. I remember qualifying was fun because there was that red flag after Q1 that lasted for over an hour, and me and Dad was sat in the grandstands opposite the paddock, and people were doing Mexican waves going from Club and Vale all the way up to Abbey, and just like egging on the drivers to come out and wave at us because there was nothing to do.
Crowd moment.
Yeah. There was no rain on race day, unfortunately. It was cloudy and overcast, but no rain. And then we had all the support series and all of that as well. Yeah, just a good weekend. The race itself, but watching it in person, it's amazing. But the race was not that interesting. But it was won by Webber. So him and Alonso were basically battling at the lead for the whole race, and then Webber worked his tyres better and took the lead from him near the end. Aren't many other standouts. I mean, I remember Button got knocked out in Q1. He made it into the points. Senna made some places. Maldonado crashed into Checo at Brooklands. Otherwise, yeah, it was a fairly bit of a procession outside of that.
I think this one goes to Webber. Obviously, it was his last win in F1. I think it was actually his last win in F1, and he just kind of held Alonso off. I think it dried up towards the end. Obviously, Red Bull had that livery. They had the livery with the people's faces on for I think it was some sort of charity. They had the one that had the faces on without any sort of thing
Wings
on top
for
of
Life.
Yeah, it was Wings for Life. So they had the one for 2010, which didn't have the Red Bull livery on them. What they did was they put the Red Bull livery and then they put the faces on top, didn't they? They kind of had like the colours on them, so it looked weird.
It came out kind of turquoise. The car. It was it was a weird. It's an interesting one because the Wings for Life they'd done that before. 2008, Coulthard had it for his final race and then got taken out of the second corner, and it's all white Red Bull. Yeah, they'd done it. Yeah, this was back when one-off liveries were actually quite rare. They weren't happening every single race, except unless you were Vettel, people weren't running special one-off helmet designs every single race as well.
Yeah. They weren't happening in every single Monaco Grand Prix, in every single British Grand Prix, in every single whatever.
So I was watching the comments from the magazine. They give full marks to both Webber and Alonso, and I think it's really very close as driver of the day between the two, because so the race was just Ferrari versus Red Bull. Massa was able to jump Vettel at the start, so Vettel was kind of hindered, so it became just Alonso versus Webber. And Alonso was mostly in control until 10 laps from the end. So I don't know how many votes he could have gotten in that span of time. And then in the final 10 laps, I think Webber starts racking up the votes because he's on the hot tail of Alonso and then he overtakes him and there are still 5 laps to the end. So I really don't know who wins it, Alonso or Webber. I think maybe Webber because at the end he won the race. But given that the votes, the poll ends at the end of the race, is there enough time to make a comeback in the votes against Alonso? So I'm gonna call myself out of the decision because I really don't know who would win between Alonso and Webber. The magazine comments for Webber is he has everything on his side: an excellent qualifying, a great start, and race management very long-sighted. knowing that his moment would have arrived at the end of the race. He was very good, and the team was perfect. For Alonso, it says, honestly, it doesn't look like he could have done anything more. He had warned after pole position. Here it counts less than other places. It's not exactly like that, but it doesn't defend him from Webber. But the standings leader is still him. So
Yeah.
the magazine. Okay, go on.
I mean, Webber, he took the lead with 5 laps remaining. So maybe that's just enough time to swing the vote in his favour. I don't know. And people would have seen it coming before then because he was closing up to him for several laps. I don't know.
Yeah, only in the last stint, which is 15 laps.
Hmm.
So just gonna watch it. How is it called in English? Something like the telemetry for the race, the gaps along the race, and so Alonso exits the pits about 4 seconds in front of Webber on lap 37. On lap 44, Webber is now in the RS zone, and until lap 47, he doesn't overtake Alonso. So it's about 5 laps of fighting and 5 laps in which he was closing down on Alonso. So overall, 15 laps in which people can see that Webber is gonna catch Alonso. I think it's reasonable. So Nedzo said Webber. You basically also say Webber, no?
Yeah.
So Webber wins driver of the day.
So he's the first double winner of driver of the day.
Yeah. Even if we'd have given it to Alonso, it would have still broken the streak.
Yeah. Then next up we have Germany. So Alonso won this from pole. Vettel famously got his penalty for passing Button off track that cost him a podium. Schumacher got fastest lap, the only fastest lap of his return. Raikkonen and Kobayashi both made big gains. So did Checo. He came from 17th to 6th. Yeah, otherwise, outside of that, fairly standard race, I guess.
I think Alonso easily wins driver of the day because the race isn't a foregone conclusion. It looks easy because Alonso does win from pole and leads almost every lap. But in the first stint at the start, there's Vettel hunting him down in the first laps, very close. And only after 7 laps, he finally opens the gap. Then in the second stint, again, Vettel is closing in on him, but doesn't overtake Alonso. And then in the last stint, it's Button that closes in on Alonso, tries multiple times to overtake, and still fails. So I think after such a race, driver of the day goes to Fernando Alonso. The comment on the magazine is his best characteristic, and he knows it, and sometimes he also talks about it, isn't raw speed, but race vision. Recently, it also came in qualifying, and now who can stop him?
Also, I think it's Alonso, yeah, because he led the whole race more or less. I will give a mini shout out to De La Rosa. It was the only race that year where he beat someone that wasn't an HRT because he overtook Timo Glock right near the end and beat him. And Carter Kayan actually almost beat Glock as well. So this is like possibly the only race that year where HRT weren't the slowest team.
Wasn't that because they, on all the high speed tracks, they just had no what's it called, downforce, so therefore they were super fast on the straights, and Hockenheim has that long straight.
Most circuits they were topping the speed traps, HRT, because that was all they had a good engine and no downforce, which I think helps them.
Oh, I have bad news for you. So Kartikeyan didn't finish ahead of Glock, and De La Rosa still finished behind Peak. So HRT was not better than Marussia. It's simply that Glock underperformed, and De La Rosa, just instead of my words, I'm going to use the words of the magazine. It says, he takes the only satisfaction that an HRT driver can achieve. Attacking and overtaking on track a Marussia. That of Glock. he asked from the colleagues respect, and he deserves it wholeheartedly. Also, about the speed traps, HRT in Hockenheim is penultimate and third to last in qualifying, and last both drivers in the race. In qualifying, they do 307.3 and 306.9 kilometers per hour, and in the Grand Prix it's 307.6 kilometers per hour for both, and they're the slowest. Even the Red Bull does 308, and the fastest is the Toro Rosso Vergne with 318 in qualifying and 319.7 in the race. So they did not have top speed as their strength.
I mean, they were hindered by the absence of Kurz. I think probably wouldn't help them in that sense.
I assume lots of people used it off the exit of turn 2, like through that little long left-hander to just get a boost onto the straight, because it's one of the only like proper long acceleration zones you have on the circuit.
Yeah, they would have. Okay, so we're thinking, fairly straightforward win for Alonso. Another race for Vettel that, again, only won his home race once, and even then it wasn't his home race because he never got to win at Hockenheim, but this was another one that didn't really work so well for him. So now we've ended up with Alonso getting a double as well as Webber. After this, we have Hungary. This, again, as a race, is one that not much happened. I know that Ciaron has a lot to say about Kimi in this, but yeah, Hamilton won from pole. Otherwise, people moved around a little, but yeah, I don't remember a huge amount else about this race.
Yeah, I think Hamilton takes this one. I don't remember much. I think it was the year after where Grosjean got his drive-through penalty for overtaking like 2 centimeters off the circuit. But yeah, Hamilton. Which race was it that Glock missed due to illness? Was it this one or was it another one?
That was Valencia.
Oh, was it? Okay.
This is not a foregone conclusion, because Ciaron is right in saying that Raikkonen drove an excellent race, and the magazine agrees, because it gives full marks to both Hamilton and Raikkonen. For Hamilton, it says he wasn't the man to beat, only because right from the start, it was easily understood that nobody was gonna beat him. He plays the elastic with the Lotus, but in truth he's always in control. And despite all that, he is worthy of the championship. For Kimi Raikkonen, it says, yes, he should be punished, because he always makes a mistake somewhere. In qualifying and at the start of the race, he gets overtaken by Alonso. But he's forgiven because his duel against Grosjean and a pace like that of always a champion. God, an awful translation, I know, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think looking back at this race, I feel like, again, on popularity alone, it might have just gone to Hamilton, and it's the easy vote because he led from the front and took the win. It's just not a race like, again, I've watched these races several times before because I've covered it in like Marussia and HRT. But I'm watching it fixating on what's happening at the back of the grid rather than at the front, so I end up not noticing what's going on there. So I think it would have been Hamilton to do it.
I agree.
I don't think it's a foregone conclusion, just like Silverstone, because since lap 51, Raikkonen was 1 second behind Hamilton, and Raikkonen had made an excellent recovery from sixth after the start, did an overcut on Grosjean, so I think many people would have seen it and would have voted for him, but maybe Hamilton does win it. So both of you call Hamilton, so Hamilton driver of the day. Just like Silverstone, I don't want to call it because I think it's close.
So that makes Hamilton our third double that we've had, so they're all starting to we're running out of new people that can kind of earn drivers of the day. So we have the summer break. Next up is Spa. Easy driver of the day for this one, Grosjean. So Button, for the first time since Australia, actually showed up and did something. He led from the front. Vettel benefited massively from Grosjean going bowling and went from 10th to 2nd, helped his championship. Actually, because of the chaos of the start, almost all the point scorers came from the midfield, so it really mixed things up. That first lap collision.
I've just realised how good your Let's Go Bowling thing worked, because it's Roman. It's Roman Let's Go Bowling.
Of course, yeah.
One mention I would like to make is Nico Hulkenberg finishes 4th for Force India and has a really good race.
Wasn't he possibly going to win it?
God.
Or I think he was in contention for a podium, but it just didn't happen.
He finished like he finished like 1 or 2 seconds behind Raikkonen in 3rd.
Yes, so the magazine actually agrees because so Button gets the full marks at 10. Vettel also gets the full marks at 10, and then Nico Hulkenberg gets a 9. For Nico Hulkenberg, the comment is he's one of the candidates to substitute Massa in Ferrari. He deserves it. The 4th place is, to this moment, his best result in Formula 1. And I just want to add myself, it is still his best result in Formula 1, 4th place. So all the way from 2012.
You're the
And
best.
for the most part of the race, he's in the upper part of the field. And he does a perfect strategy. As for Button, the magazine says, since the weekend started, that is qualifying, he's practically perfect. Even in the technical choices, we only have to see if the comeback is real or if he once more will lose himself along the way. For Vettel, it says, he looked doomed to finish outside of the points or to gain very few. Instead, he makes the best use of the Red Bull setup for the race, and unlike Webber, he manages to stay in front of the Ferrari of Massa. He is worthy of the title.
Button is the easy one just because he led every lap, and even without the collisions at the start, he got pole. He maybe could have won it because this race was famously a source of tension because that's where Hamilton decided to publish all of their telemetry data on Twitter, because he was like, I think, again, probably similar to this year, accusing them of sabotage and all of that. Even though what it actually was that he was on a higher downforce setup than Button, so Button was just faster on the straights, which works better in Spa. And also I think he had maybe they had some upgrades they'd given to Button first, or a new front wing, something of that nature. But I would love to give it to Hulkenberg, but the thing about that is this is before everyone realized that he was never going to get a podium, so it maybe doesn't have the same weight that it does now. So it's kind of getting boring just saying, oh, the race winner gets driver of the day, but I think it might have been Button.
I'm going to go left field and say Hulkenberg, even though, just to be different.
I will follow Nesto. Hulkenberg gets driver of the day because Hulkenberg was up to 3rd after the crash, and then at the safety car restart he overtook Raikkonen. So for the first part of the race he was running 2nd behind Button, and then he still defended from Massa at the end. So I think Hulkenberg takes it. Also because I think everybody realizes that Button, Vettel, Raikkonen, that there was a massive shunt at the front. So obviously they're gonna be up ahead. But Hulkenberg, he's on a Force India, so much more impressive, also being ahead of Massa, Webber, Schumacher.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a 2v1, so I guess that goes to Hulkenberg. Next is Monza. Again, I don't remember much about this race. Hamilton won from pole. Checo was a tyre whisperer again. Alonso climbed through. Vettel had a late retirement, so did Webber. At a circuit that Red Bull were typically quite weak at. I don't really know with this one, but I'm leaning on Checo.
I'm leaning on Checo. Wasn't this the first double Red Bull DNF for a long time? Wasn't it like ages until they got another one? Wasn't it until like 2018 or 2017?
Probably at Baku 2018 maybe would have been their next one. Off the top of my head.
I do think Perez was good because wasn't there a chance? Because I remember watching that race and on the onboard on one, I think it was his overtake on Alonso towards the end where he got the second place. Half of his camera was covered by whatever gunk and stuff. I don't know if that because Croft, I remember, said he can only see half through one of his eyes. Obviously, not realizing that what the camera sees is not what the driver sees. But yeah, it was a good race from Checo. I think that's possibly had Hamilton been announced as moving to Mercedes yet? I don't think he had he?
That was about to come up. That was wasn't far
I
off.
think it's all the way until Korea or India that he finally announces the move.
It wasn't until October at least. It was still in September.
I think that might have been Sergio's final audition for that McLaren seat if they were already pretty much finalising it internally.
So, in my view, the driver of the day is fought between Hamilton, Perez, and Alonso. So, for Alonso, he's on the Ferrari in Italy, and he recovers from a lost pole position in quali due to a technical issue until third place. Then there's Hamilton. Of course, he has a lot of fans, and he wins from pole position. And then there's Sergio Perez, who actually recovers from 13 to second on what many at the time believed was not an excellent car. We're starting all to think that the Sauber was far better than we all thought it was in 2012. But if I had to say driver of the day, I think it does go to Perez, just because he does a more impressive recovery than Alonso. As for the race, it was... if you follow Alonso and Perez, it's actually quite interesting because Alonso is then fighting with Vettel and he's trying to overtake him, and everybody remembers that Vettel pushed him out. And so the controversy, because in 2011 Alonso had done the same but didn't get a penalty, and Vettel instead does and gets a penalty. So Italian favoritism for Ferrari. And then somebody else comes out and says, yes, but Vettel had only put Alonso 2 wheels on the grass. Alonso had put Vettel 2 wheels only on the grass in 2011, and instead in 2012 Vettel puts Alonso with all 4 wheels on the grass. Excellent by Alonso not to crash in those conditions. So the race was actually quite interesting if you look at the Perez and Alonso. I do think that Perez earns driver of the day. He's also in the magazine. He also gets the full marks. It says, looking outside the track, Checo is the most normal person in the world. At the wheel, as soon as he can, he becomes a beast. Starting on the hard tires doesn't help him, but this Sauber is a great car. So, I do think driver of the day for Perez.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think so too. It was 23 laps on that final stint and gaining positions the whole time. So then we have Singapore. This one, it becomes a win for Vettel because Hamilton retires from the lead. Maldonado gets a front row start, but then he has his own mechanical failure. A couple of safety cars. Schumacher starts to show his old age when he wipes out Verne. They went to the time limit with this one too, at a very long race, as they always are. I guess you would just say that the main one is Vettel, just for having the lead, but it's, I don't know.
Going back to your Schumacher point, I think, hadn't he taken out someone else at the 2011 race at the exact same point on the track, turn 7? Or wherever it was.
Wasn't there a collision with Heidfeld? I think it was 2010. Something happened with him and a Sauber.
Yeah.
I think Heidfeld, because in that race, Kobayashi crashed into the wall on its own.
Yeah, you also briefly mentioned Maldonado. He was running third until he's had his hydraulics failure. I think he's also a shout for driver of the day. Because Vettel he just led from the front and just did nothing while all other people had problems. But I think Maldonado, again, considering that Williams wasn't like a top 2 or top 3 car, I think he did a fantastic job.
Yeah, I know that before the race, Lewis had to like beg him to just not crash into him at the start, which would have been fun. But yeah, it's a bit of an odd race, this one.
So the magazine gives the full marks only to Lewis Hamilton. Everybody else is lower. But of course, for our purposes, driver of the day for a driver who retired after 11 laps, Hamilton can't win it simply because he retired too soon. So for the other choices, the magazine gives 9 to Vettel, to Alonso, and to Di Resta.
Oh yeah, Di
Given
Resta. What about him?
Yes, because Di Resta finished fourth, and he was just behind Alonso, very close. But at the end, the Ferrari had more, so he didn't gain the podium. So I actually think it goes to Di Resta, because Vettel wins after inheriting a lead. Alonso, yes, he's third, but he does nothing all the race. It's Paul Di Resta, the real guy, because he's on a Force India and he's finishing fourth.
I can agree with that. I completely forgot about Di Resta. I was like, oh shit, yeah, he did finish fourth, didn't he? In a Force India. That was really. He was a kind of tyre whisperer of sorts. He liked to do these super long stints on tyres, and just sometimes it was just for the sake of it, rather than because it's a strategical advantage. But yeah, as much as he was a awful commentator on Sky Sports, he had his good moments every now and again in F1.
He evidently had the edge on Hulkenberg this weekend because Hulkenberg qualified like 11th or 12th, and Di Resta started the race 6th. And I'm trying to pinpoint when he would have pit around lap 12. He didn't lose positions during either of the safety cars, so he must have pitted during both of them. So he was in fourth. He was in third when the first safety car started, and then got passed by Alonso. I'm guessing pitting, and then just managed to hold that. Whereas Hulkenberg in the first pit stop was 5th. But then he dropped to as low as he dropped to as low as 18th towards the end. So something I can't remember what must have happened there that meant he didn't do so well. But yeah, Di Resta got himself in fourth.
Yeah, I think Di Resta's like Maldonado if he actually finished the race, kind of thing.
So we get Di Resta, driver of the day.
Yeah, bit of an oddball one, and something you wouldn't expect. How many drivers is that? 10 of them now. 10 different ones.
So we had 8 different drivers at the start. Weber, Alonso, Hamilton repeated. Then Perez also repeated. And so from those 8, only Hulkenberg and Di Resta are added. So that's a total of 10 different driver of the day.
Yeah,
so almost half the grid has got a driver of the day at some point.
Yeah, Button still doesn't have one. Neither does Raikkonen or Grosjean. Massa doesn't, of course.
Kayan doesn't.
Yeah, we're good at mixing these up. Any other season, you'd have someone who get like 4 or 5 driver of the day votes in a row.
Yeah, wait for 1982 if we ever do that. That'll be a hard one to do.
Give genuinely anybody.
Yeah,
I guess we aren't doing this thing right. We're missing something because it's impossible to have 10 different driver of the day winners.
I think we're being too objective. We're not. Yeah, we're not
fans.
Yeah, we're not fangirling enough and just voting for whoever's the fittest driver or whatever.
Oh my god, Nico Hulkenberg is blonde. Oh my god.
Okay, I'm gonna change my approach then. So I'm gonna fangirl for Alonso, and I think Alonso is driver of the day in Australia, in Malaysia, in Valencia, at Hockenheim. Also driver of the day in Spain because it is his home race. And driver of the day also at Monza, so that's 6 times driver of the day Alonso.
Next we have Japan. Again, it's Kobayashi. It just is. Starts third, finishes third. Massa did actually, to be fair to him, Vettel led from the front. Massa had an excellent race for once. He went from 10th to 2nd. Admittedly benefited from Grosjean going bowling at the start. Alonso Raikkonen happened, and I'm leaning on Alonso being at fault for that one. That helps it all, but yeah, it's the standout is Kobayashi here.
Home podium for the first time since Suzuki in 1990, that kind of thing.
I mean, from an objective point of view, it's Vettel, driver of the day. He was the best driver on track, and he definitely had everything in control. He was just so massively faster than everybody else. It is frightening. But driver of the day is also Driver of the Day is also a popularity vote, and so it absolutely goes to Kobayashi, Japanese driver at the Japanese Grand Prix, first podium ever. So Kobayashi.
The other thing you have to factor in is that yes, Vettel did an amazing performance. He did everything he needed to because Suzuka was one of his strongest circuits, but he was in the fastest car, whereas Kobayashi was not. And even though it was hard to pinpoint where a lot of cars stacked up that year, by all accounts, the Sauber was just a midfielder that could occasionally break into the front, and so he did it here.
It was like, fifth or sixth most of the time.
We haven't had any repeat, like, nobody's won 2 consecutive Driver of the Day votes yet.
Vettel's only won 1 so far, hasn't he?
Yeah, that might change. After Japan, we've got Korea. Again, a lot of people...
Wait, I just want to add something to Japan, because Sauber, everyone believes it was a midfielder. I actually am starting to think that it wasn't a midfielder, it was a properly good car. It's just that nobody understood how to set up that car, and so most of the time they were nowhere. Because you see, you can't have such good peaks at such different tracks. So Sauber is competitive in Malaysia. It is competitive in Canada. Then it is competitive at Monza. Then it is competitive here in Japan. It's all places where top speed helps, but also good turning speed helps to do well at these tracks. And so it means the car is very good for a long part of the year across a fairly wide range of tracks. But at the end, they were only competitive at 4 places. Well, make it 5, because at Hockenheim, Kobayashi finished 4th. So it's already 5 tracks where the car was very good and competitive. And it doesn't make sense that over Japan is the 13th race or 15th race. So out of 15 races, the Sauber is competitive only at 5 races. You start to think that these drivers, for 2/3 of the year, they were underperforming. Either the drivers or the team with not setting the car up correctly. So, in fact, I want to add the magazine gives full marks to Vettel, but Felipe Massa and Kobayashi only get an 8. They do not get a 9. It's an 8. It's good, but not very good. So
going back to your point on like the tracks they were at, I don't think it was necessarily a case of them not knowing how to set up the car. I think maybe it was a case of their drivers just decided they knew how to tyre whisper at some circuits, but they didn't know how to tyre whisper at other circuits because, like as I said, Perez had some very good tyre whisper moments, but only in sporadic moments throughout the year. And so same with Kobayashi, because they were both kind of tyre whisperers. Perez learned his craft from Kobayashi kind of thing. I think that it was just that you could argue that Kobayashi was quite inconsistent, but I think that Perez especially just knew how to tyre whisper at some circuits, but not others.
I think as well, and Manisha Kaltenborn admitted this, that they tended just to set the cars up for tire endurance and race pace rather than qualifying. So that was always their emphasis, which sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. I don't really think that this car in its natural state was a front runner, because it seems a bit odd to me to have 2010, 2011, which were obvious midfield cars, and 2013 again was an obvious midfield car, and then in 2012 they suddenly have a front runner when the regulations haven't changed much except for the new stepped nose and everything. Other than the tyres, things haven't really changed. They wouldn't suddenly leap forward in development and then go back again in 2013. I think it's just that they benefited from the fact that we had a lot of chaotic races where the orders mixed around a lot, but also because they tried these different strategies, which...
And it was new tyres and stuff, yeah.
Sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. Yeah.
You make also a good case on the fact that 2012 is a very erratic year. My belief is that the Pirelli are crap, and so every team is struggling to understand how to best use them. And so at some tracks you get surprise performances, like Williams in Spain. Sadly, the Williams is the fastest car on track, and instead the Red Bull isn't really somewhere as competitive. And then at the British Grand Prix, McLaren is nowhere, and there is no apparent reason why they should be nowhere, because they were competitive the race before and they are competitive the race after. But at the British Grand Prix, McLaren is nowhere. In China, Sauber is nowhere because they finish 10th and 11th. And they were even starting higher up the field. Kobayashi, you said, was starting third. And then in the race, they just fall down massively. And the race before, Perez was almost winning. So I think 2012 is a very erratic year. And that means there are a lot of chances, a lot of opportunities, a lot of occasions to take advantage of. And so, aside from teams underperforming, there are just chances that someone fairly competitive can get an excellent result. Japan is actually an example because Hamilton took himself out by changing the setup from FP3 to Q1, and the car felt awful. So Hamilton wasn't competitive. Button had a 5-place grid penalty for changing the gearbox. Then there was a massive crash at the start that took out Webber, Grosjean, Alonso, and Raikkonen was compromised. So the field simply opened up for some drivers. Kobayashi was one of them, and then Kobayashi drove a good race. I also think that the Sauber was actually competitive, because otherwise he wouldn't have kept Button behind. The McLaren was the second best car that day.
Okay, so let's move on to Korea. This again was a pretty uneventful race. Webber got pole, but Vettel took the lead immediately and then won. Toro Rosso had an amazing race. They went from 16th and 21st to 8th and 9th. Lewis had a stinker. Button got taken out on the first lap. Yeah, I mean, this again, I like this circuit, and like with Valencia, it's kind of emblematic of the diffuser era. The 2010 race was chaotic and nuts and everything, but the circuit was like built in a swamp, and it was meant to have this. It was meant to end up similar to what Abu Dhabi is, and then they just built none of that. And then they just got rid of it when it was a pretty cool circuit, but the races just often didn't deliver.
Yeah, I remember. You mentioned Lewis briefly had a bad race. I remember at one point he had AstroTurf stuck underneath his car, didn't he? He pulled up a bit of AstroTurf and it got stuck underneath he got stuck to part of his car, and he just. I remember people making Kermit the Frog memes about it back in the day.
Of course, this is the race to throw back is when they had Psy there doing bloody Gangnam Style and waving the checkered flag, because of course that was a thing when this race was going on.
Yeah.
So I think driver of the day easily goes to Sebastian Vettel. So perfect race. He starts well, overtakes Webber, and from that moment onwards, he builds up an advantage, DRS proof. In the meaning that nobody even remotely gets close to 1 second. There is just a small indecision, long in a turn, and doesn't really change the result. Like it often happens, he was the best driver to make use of the tires.
Yeah, I mean, races like this is Vettel at his best. It's when he can just kind of control the race from the front and do everything he needs to do to mean that nobody can challenge him. And also within the context of, this is him putting his foot down to try and claim the title as well, after a very shaky year up until that point. What's next? India.
I think this is going to be the first double. I think it's going to be the first two in a row.
I think so, because again, not a very eventful race. Not much to say. I can't think of much that happened, to be honest.
I remember Maldonado and Kobayashi coming together. I remember Schumacher getting the puncture. I remember De La Rosa spinning off, but apart from that, I don't remember much.
So I think instead the driver of the day goes to Alonso, because let's recap his race. He started 5th behind. Okay, let me take the right page. Behind Vettel, Webber, Hamilton, and Button. Right away at the start, he overtakes Hamilton. Then, some laps after, around lap 4 and 5, there's Hamilton, Alonso, and Button all together in DRS down that very long straight that India has, which goes even up and down. And so Alonso did a move in which he just let both of them pass, and then took with the rest the double slipstream and overtook them both. Then halfway through the straight, he got ahead of them. Now they had the slipstream, and Alonso was still somehow able to keep both of them behind in the braking zone, and so he overtook both McLaren cars. And then later in the race, he was hunting down Webber. Then Webber had the CARS problem, and once Webber had the CARS problem, Alonso was just on it and finally overtook Webber. So, and Vettel didn't even go open a big gap. He finished only 9.4 seconds ahead of Alonso on what clearly was at the time the best car. So even the magazine gives full marks to both Vettel and Alonso. With Vettel, it says, if we really want to find a defect, but we really have to put a lot of effort, he simply didn't set the fastest lap of the race. He didn't even need to. The Red Bull was of another category today, but only in his hands. For Alonso, it says, one of his best races, he says. He's probably right, but by now there are many such races. Incredible, the coldness on which, after the start, he attacks and overtakes the McLaren on the straight. Also merit of a well set up car. So it's either Vettel, driver of the day, from dominating performance, or Alonso because he actually was the showman.
If we're talking about objectively, it probably is Alonso. But we're talking about F1 fans, and F1 fans just see Vettel winning by 10 seconds, leading from the front. That's the thing. For India, I think he led every single lap that was ever held at the Indian Grand Prix. He was the best driver there. I think that even if Alonso edged him just slightly in terms of individual performances, I think that Vettel would have got driver of the day.
Yes, because we shouldn't forget, Vettel right now has a streak ongoing of most consecutive laps led. So it starts all the way from lap 21 at Singapore when Hamilton retired, and then he led every lap in Japan, in Korea, and now in India. So maybe there's also counts for the driver of the day. I honestly want to call myself out. I don't think I can choose between Vettel and Alonso. I think it's very close. So I'll let you two decide.
I'll go Vettel.
Yeah, me too.
Vettel it is. And he's also the first driver to take driver of the day twice in a row.
Yeah. After only having one all season.
Yeah. Now we have Abu Dhabi. I love this race, and I think everyone loves this race. Although at the same time, it did kind of justify keeping Abu Dhabi on the calendar. But yeah, so Raikkonen wins it, so that makes him a candidate for driver of the day. At the same time, Vettel went from the pit lane to third, proving that he can overtake when he has to, and having to deal with safety cars that came at less opportune times than he would like. Grosjean did his thing with Webber. Maldonado was running well and had mechanical problems. Just a very chaotic race.
Yeah, I actually watched back part of that race the other day. I remember because Vettel had a couple of problems. So obviously he started from the pit lane. He had to pit. Didn't he have to pit again for a new front wing because he hit a polystyrene DRS board on the back straight under the safety car because I think it was Ricciardo who swerved in front of him. He had that problem, and then he just managed to come back to third. Admittedly, there were things that happened in front of him, like for example, Maldonado and Webber came together. That wasn't Maldonado's fault. Webber just turned in on him. And then Maldonado himself actually had this is me being a Maldonado sympathizer again. He was running up in the top 3, and then his KERS failed after lap 9. He was running with KERS throughout the entire race, and I think that without that he would have got third. And I think that Raikkonen did a good job just keeping it at the front. Vettel did a good job getting through the field, but it was obviously the best car on the grid at that point, especially for that track. And he got out of Parc Fermé to change the car so it's better for overtaking, so it would have been easier to overtake. And Maldonado, I think that Williams, although I think that over the season it wasn't the 8th quickest car like we saw in the constructor standings, I think it definitely wasn't in the top 5 of all the cars. So I think Maldonado running in the top 3 and getting 5th is one of the drivers of the season, especially without the KERS.
So the magazine gives full marks to Raikkonen, Alonso, Vettel, and Hamilton, and then gives a fully deserved 9 to Maldonado and Ida. So, in my opinion, the driver of the day is between Raikkonen and Vettel, and I once again cannot decide because. So I'm just gonna put forward the arguments. On one end, you have a driver who is leading the championship, fighting for the championship at the third to last race. He gets his lap time taken away through no fault of his own. He has to start from last and then makes an absolute recovery to third place, even overtaking Button on track. On the other hand, you have a driver who is a fan favorite, who has been very fast all year, but still is lacking the first win since his comeback. And then he has the chance, and he absolutely delivers on it. He is in control of the race throughout. So I think it's because Raikkonen winning was awaited all year because already at the fourth race he almost won. Then throughout the season he had many other chances to win, but ultimately he didn't. And so finally winning is something that every fan was waiting since March. On the other hand, you also have a title fight, very up and down, very erratic, but now it's closing down, and it's between Vettel and Alonso, and Vettel just did an excellent performance. So I really cannot decide. What do you two decide?
I mean, Vettel, he went from 21st to 2nd in 15 laps because he went back to last again in the first safety car when he hit that marker board. But I think just vibes, people would say Raikkonen because he finally got that win, even though you would look at it and think, okay, he started 4th, got to 2nd at the start, but then inherited the win from Lewis when Lewis retired. So it could be considered a free win in that regard if we're using the definition I've used in the past. But also he had his, leave me alone, I know what to do kind of thing as well. And that would probably just swing it for Raikkonen.
I mean, I'm personally going to go Maldonado, but I know most people won't agree with that, but I'm going to go Maldonado. I think that given his mechanical fault, I think that would have lost him about half a second in lap time. And the fact that he even stayed in the top 10, never mind the top 5, was a miracle.
Okay, so we have a tie break because you
for
two cannot
goodness sake.
decide, and I cannot decide. So if I am forced to decide, I would go with Raikkonen. So
Yeah,
Fair enough.
barely. He gets like, I don't know, 40% of the vote, and Vettel gets 35, something like that. Yeah.
we're almost finished.
Yep,
Yeah,
nearly there.
two more races.
So now we have United States, the
COTA.
Freedom Grand Prix.
First race at COTA, actually.
Yeah, first race at COTA. It's kind of weird because I always think of COTA as like a modern circuit, so I forget that we raced there pre-hybrid. It was brand new. Really, like there was no grip at all in practice, and it took a while to sort of bed the track in.
Wasn't there a lot of problems at turn 19?
Probably. I don't know which turn 19 is, but yeah.
Second to last corner.
The second to last corner. Well, there's always problems there. People are always getting track limits and stuff, aren't they? This is another circuit which it suffers from too much runoff syndrome. Needs more gravel. Okay, well, Vettel got pole, was leading, but Hamilton was faster, passed him with a little help from Acescheil and won. Massa and Button moved up from outside the points into the points. Alonso, again, with a little help from Massa, he went from 3rd to 7th. Only 2 retirements, Webber and Verne. Fairly uneventful race overall.
I think Hamilton takes this just because I think it was a straight fight between him and Vettel. The Red Bull was obviously, I think, the better car overall at the end of the season, but McLaren was obviously better on the straights, and there's a couple of long straights at COTA. I think that Hamilton put in the better performance here. I remember watching that race live, and yeah, he just did a decent. He might have only done a decent or a good job, but he did a better job than Vettel, especially considering Vettel was in a title fight.
I completely agree with Nedzo. Every point, I also share it. The magazine also gives the full mark only to Hamilton, and it says he obtains his fourth seasonal victory after an accelerating double with Vettel, who he overtakes 15 laps from the end thanks to the backmarker Kartikeyan that allows him to open the DRS at the most opportune moment. He races with the usual intensity, even when, after the first laps, the McLaren didn't look like it could keep up the pace with the Red Bull. He set very fast times, even on cold tires.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's also just very popular in America.
Yeah,
so I think it
because he kind of adapts to their culture of celebrity, doesn't he? He's kind of licks it up. So he kind of licks it up. I nearly said he I can't think of a word now.
He spent too much time in Hollywood.
Yeah.
More than what's good for him, basically.
Yeah. He goes on all the talk shows and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that for him that's an easy one. So then we have the final round, Brazil. I mean, there are loads of people it could go to in this one.
Button, Hulkenberg, Vettel even, Alonso.
Yeah, there are lots of candidates because this was one of the best races ever. I mean, Vettel, you would say, wins the title, climbs all the way up to 6th from the back from an accident that wasn't fault in a car that's damaged, missing half its floor, and also the radio's not working. So that alone, Alonso again, he did some nice overtakes, did everything he needed to do, but didn't work out. Button won it and was amazing. Him and Hulkenberg were amazing because they stayed out on dry tyres, I think, while everyone else was pitting for wets and got this gigantic lead early on. Kobayashi was very good at disrupting things as well. Yeah.
Typical Kobayashi. I mean, you said it wasn't Vettel's fault, but I think he turned in on Senna and he caused it himself. Yeah, I mean, obviously my Maldonado got crashed out on lap 2, so I can't give him it. But I think if Hulkenberg if he'd have just spun on lap 55 instead of crashing into someone, I think it will be easily him. But I don't think we can give a race. I don't think we can give a driver of the day to someone who's crashed someone completely out of a race and ruined their race. It's like I wouldn't give Jenson Button driver of the day for Canada 2011. I don't think he'd have even been in a question, despite winning, because of him crashing 2 people out. But yeah, I think here you could give it to Jenson. I think ironically giving him his first driver of the day in the last race of the season would be very fair. While Alonso did good, he just did good. He wasn't spectacular, but he wasn't terrible. He did all he could to win the championship, but it wasn't enough. Vettel, he had a good recovery, but in my opinion, he caused the recovery. He caused the reason for the recovery himself. So I think that was brought upon him by himself. Hulkenberg, again, fantastic up until the crash, and even did well considering he had a drive-through penalty. Yeah, there's a ton of drivers you can go for. I'd personally go Button though.
I think the driver of the day easily goes to Sebastian Vettel. So he has a shunt at the first lap, then he recovers with a half-broken car to win a very contested and intriguing championship. So I think Vettel easily gets driver of the day simply because he's going to become the world champion very soon.
Yeah, I mean, like with Alonso, for example, yeah, he was making moves early on, but then like Vettel, he kind of qualified slightly out of position. It felt a bit just safe. I mean, he let himself get passed by Kobayashi at one of the restarts and things like that, kind of disrupting it. Hulkenberg, I didn't realize he led the race for nearly 30 laps. I'd forgotten it was that long.
Hulkenberg should have won that race.
Yeah, and without the collision with Lewis, I think he probably could. Although I think he was actually he was.
He's entirely at fault for that collision.
Yeah. It was for the lead, so he was ahead of Button. So without that, he could have won it.
Yeah.
But he also got overtaken by Hamilton because he made a mistake. It wasn't just Hamilton being faster and finally overtaking him. Hulkenberg was leading, he was the fastest driver, and he made a mistake and allowed Hamilton past. And then he made another mistake trying to overtake Hamilton. So, massive blunder by Nico Hulkenberg.
There were lots of back markers in that thing as well. I mean, it was still Hulkenberg's fault, absolutely, but there were, I think, a Caterham and a Marussia they were trying to let him through at the first corner and they just bottlenecked. Yeah, the Hulkenberg, he made a mistake on lap 48. I remember he half spun. I think it was Bico de Pato. I think it was either Albon corner or the one after Ferragura. I can't remember what the name of it is.
Magulio.
No, I'm talking about the sharp right-hander after Ferragura. So you go through turn.
That is Bico de Pato.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was. I mean, a couple of other standouts I should mention actually was Verne. He went from 17th to 8th, so he had a good race. If Caterham were voting, they would give it to Peak because he gave them 10th in the constructors. There's 11. Yeah, Petrov gets 11th, which was the best result all year for Caterham. Schumacher, because Mercedes had been just invisible for the past 7 or 8 races, then Schumacher went from 13th to 7th, even though he gave his position to Vettel. Yeah. Rosberg was not good all race. Raikkonen, obviously, he goes into the pit. He goes into the escape road, which is now closed off at the end, which it wasn't last time he raced there, which killed his race. I think, it would go to Vettel because he had so much more to have to contest with than the other drivers. Because Alonso wasn't running in a damaged car that had been spun round with no radio.
One thing I will say, something that people have completely forgotten about the race. Do you remember afterwards when there was talk that Vettel had overtaken under double wave jellos?
Oh, yeah.
And double wave jellos, and there was a chance he could have got a 20-second time penalty.
Yeah, that nearly happened. I think that they were like, let's just not go there. I think the stewards decided it was best to just leave it.
To just not cause a riot.
Yeah. And then again 9 years later they were like, yeah, let's just not go there. Let's just leave it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much will agree that Vettel is driver of the day.
I think so.
Just one add on that comment about Caterham and Marussia. In the end, Pick did the right thing because we saw years later Nasr, he did the opposite and he lost the seat. Yeah. So it's understandable that Pick betrayed his own team.
It was that weekend that they'd announced he was joining Caterham next year, which is, I think, the most sideways move in Formula One history.
Yeah.
One of the most
anonymous driver.
Yeah.
One of my mates met Charles Pic when he was Lotus's Testo reserve driver in 2014 at Silverstone.
Oh, did he get to talk to him, or
he signed something from him? I don't know what he said. He was just kind of, yeah, hello, I'm really awkward.
Yeah, I mean, his interviews, he was a very uninteresting person. But he's got his cushy little thing running dams in Formula 2 now, so he's still involved in that sphere. Let's give it Vettel. So after that, 20 races. We mixed it up quite a bit, but it looks like Vettel's got the most.
Yeah, after having won for most, it's just the last 6 races, kind of like the actual season. The last 6 races, he just pulls it out of his arse.
Yeah. So what I've got here, I've got 2 for Alonso, 1 for Di Resta, 3 for Hamilton, 1 for Hülkenberg, 1 for Kobayashi, 1 for Maldonado, 2 for Checo, 1 for Raikkonen, 1 for Ricciardo, 1 for Rosberg, 4 for Vettel, and then 2 for Webber.
I think is it still only 10 drivers in the end because we never gave Button one in the end.
Yeah, Button never got one. Neither did Massa, Grosjean. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Schumacher. 12 different drivers on the driver of the day.
Yeah, which I think is quite realistic because if we'd done this for 2013, it would have been 2 drivers.
Yeah, Vettel and insert other people here.
Yeah,
it would have been Raikkonen, Alonso, Vettel, and Hamilton. Maybe Rosberg once.
But otherwise, it's just the Sebastian Vettel show.
Absolutely.
But yeah, 2012 is an obvious season to do. Everyone loves it. It found that right balance of sort of well compared to 2021, the drama was far less manufactured. It was more,
and it was a lot more teams and a lot more drivers. It wasn't just 2 guys going at it. There was everything going on.
Yeah, it was more organic. The grid was a big grid, 24 cars. The cars all looked different because they were actually painted as well, different designs. The grid spread was good. The drivers were interesting as characters because we had a variety in terms of personalities, but also driving styles and everything else, which just made it quite a stacked grid as well in terms of talent. It has just a lot going for it.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that 2012 is almost unique because you have 9 top drivers, of which 7 are or will become world champions. And so, inevitably, if you only have 10 point scoring places, someone's going to have a great weekend, finish 9th, and everybody's going to be disappointed. Because if there are 9 top drivers, someone's got to finish 9th. And for that driver, even if he's a top driver, it's going to be a very disappointing weekend.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's just nuts.
But yeah, I think in the future we can do more of these. I mean, it's quite an easy topic to cover and quite an interesting one. And I can certainly think of several other seasons that would be good ones. I mean, I can't imagine. Yeah, I think it'd be difficult. It's like, no, let's do Driver of the Day for 1950 because it's like, what people have to ring in, assuming they even have a house phone to cast their vote, or it's done in a magazine that you have to post away, and you get the result you get the result in 6 to 8 weeks or whatever.
Yeah.
By which point there's already been 3 other races.
New idea: Driver of the Year from 1920 to 1948. So you gotta watch all the races of the pre-war period.
I don't mind that. I can do that. Caracciolo, Nuvolari,
Gonna be 10 times Nuvolari.
Yeah, it's just going to be
Antonio
Nuvolari. Bernd Rosemeyer, did he race or was he just doing the speed tests for Mercedes?
He raced. He raced.
Farina at least did some stuff in the 1930s. And Fagioli, yeah. Fangio wasn't so much the 1930s, but yeah, Farina won a couple of was it European Championships or Italian Championships or something?
Yeah. Louis Chiron.
Antonio Ascari, of course.
Jean-Pierre Vermeil, he was 1940s though, I suppose. Hans Stuck, I like saying that name, Stuck.
Yeah, again, he was one of Hitler's auto union test drivers. Yeah.
It was actually quite funny. You know, but you talked about Bernd Rosemeyer. He was actually staunchly against the SS, and every single time he had the opportunity to tell jokes behind their back, it was actually quite funny.
I think a lot of people secretly were, but maybe they just wanted to keep their jobs. Or he just, was like, oh, I like driving really dangerous cars really fast, so I'd like to keep doing that. Didn't he die in the auto union car?
Well, yeah, he died in one of the land speed tests. I think he did 270 miles an hour and lost control.
Yeah.
So it'd be quite horrific.
Yeah. But yeah, we'll do more of these in the future. Maybe slightly more recent seasons or years than going back to the 1930s. But yeah, these. Yeah. But yeah, obviously, just let us know in the comments suggestions of seasons you'd like us to cover for Driver of the Day. You've been listening to the DRS Train podcast. We're on YouTube and Spotify, and you can find us on Instagram and X at the DRS Train podcast. Make sure to tune in for our next episode. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next time.